The room erupted in applause when my father handed my sister the keys to the family house. Sarah accepted them with a smug smile, twirling the brass ring around her finger like she'd just collected a prize she'd always been owed. The house, the savings, the investments, everything seemed to be hers. I sat quietly at the far end of the conference table, arms folded, while relatives exchanged those practiced, sympathetic glances. For years, everyone assumed I was the forgotten child. Even Sarah looked at me like I should be grateful for whatever scraps remained. Then Dad's attorney cleared his throat and pulled out one final envelope nobody knew existed. The sound of that seal breaking cut through the room like a blade. Suddenly, nobody was smiling anymore. My name is Emily Carter, and I was 34 years old when my father handed my sister the keys to a house that should have changed both our lives. Looking back, I think everyone in the family already knew how that day would end. Everyone except me. My younger sister, Sarah, had always been the favorite, not in an obvious way at first. My parents never said it out loud. They didn't have to. When Sarah got A's and B's in school, she was praised for working hard. When I got straight A's, it was simply expected. When Sarah switched college majors 3 times, my parents called her adventurous. When I carefully planned my career and earned promotions, they called me practical. Sarah was exciting. I was dependable. And somehow, dependable never received the applause. By the time we were adults, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Sarah lived loudly, expensive vacations, new cars every few years, endless social media posts showing a life that looked perfect from the outside. Meanwhile, I worked as a financial consultant, paid my bills, invested carefully, and helped my parents whenever they needed it, especially Dad. 3 years before his death, his health started declining. Nothing dramatic at first, a missed appointment, a forgotten phone call, small things, then larger things, doctor visits, hospital stays, physical therapy. Through all of it, Sarah was usually too busy. She always had a reason: work deadlines, weekend trips, networking events. Dad never complained, not once. If he was disappointed, he kept it to himself. So I drove him to appointments. I organized medications. I handled paperwork. I repaired things around the house. And every Sunday, without fail, I brought lunch and spent the afternoon with him, not because I expected anything, but because he was my father. Still, I won't pretend it didn't hurt when he constantly defended Sarah. She's finding herself, he'd say. She means well. Give her time. I always gave her time, years of it. Then, 8 months before he passed away, Dad called both of us to the family house, the same beach house our grandparents had purchased decades earlier. The house held every family memory we had: summer cookouts, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. It wasn't just property, it was history. That afternoon, Dad stood on the deck overlooking the water. The wind was strong enough to rattle the railings. "I want you girls to remember something," he said quietly. "Money comes and goes." Sarah glanced at her phone. I listened. Character is what remains. At the time, I didn't think much of the comment. Months later, those words would mean everything. Dad passed away peacefully the following spring. The funeral was difficult. Despite everything, I loved him deeply. For several weeks afterward, life felt like a blur. Then came the state meeting, the day everything changed. Or so I thought. The attorney's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. Sarah arrived wearing an expensive designer outfit and enough confidence for everyone in the room. Several relatives had gathered: aunts, uncles, 2 cousins. Everyone knew Dad had done well financially. Nobody knew exactly how well. The attorney, Mr. Reynolds, greeted everyone and opened a thick folder. "Thank you for coming," he said. The room fell silent. He began reading: several charitable donations, a few personal gifts, then the major assets. I noticed Sarah sitting straighter with every paragraph, almost waiting. Finally, Mr. Reynolds looked up. "The beach house shall transfer in full ownership to Sarah Carter." Sarah's lips curled immediately. There it was, the smile. Not happiness, but victory. The kind of smile someone gives when they believe they've beaten everyone else. Relatives exchanged glances. A few looked toward me sympathetically, as if they expected me to be devastated. Sarah accepted the brass house keys Mr. Reynolds placed on the table. She actually spun them around her finger. Then she looked directly at me. Not a word. Just a smirk. The same smirk she'd worn for years whenever life seemed to reward her again. Dad's favorite child had won, or at least, that's what everyone believed. Mr. Reynolds continued reading several smaller asset distributions, but I wasn't listening anymore. Something felt strange because the meeting wasn't ending. The attorney still had documents in front of him. More importantly, there was a sealed envelope sitting beside his folder. It hadn't been mentioned once. I watched as he carefully placed the final page of the will aside. Sarah stood. Well, she said proudly, holding up the keys. I guess Dad made his wishes pretty clear. A few relatives awkwardly nodded. Then Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat. Actually, he said. The room froze. Sarah slowly sat back down. The attorney reached for the sealed envelope. His expression changed completely. This, he said, holding it up, contains your father's final instruction. Suddenly, nobody in the room was smiling anymore. Mr. Reynolds turned the envelope over carefully. For a moment, nobody spoke. The confidence Sarah had displayed only seconds earlier seemed to fade slightly. What's that? She asked. The attorney adjusted his glasses. This envelope contains a personal letter your father instructed me to read only after the will had been completed. The room grew even quieter. Then he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, Dad's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Mr. Reynolds began reading. If you're hearing this, then I'm gone. And Sarah has already received the beach house. Sarah smiled again. For about 3 seconds. Then the letter continued. Before anyone celebrates or feels disappointed, there are things you deserve to know. I felt my stomach tighten. For many years, I watched both of my daughters make choices. Some choices were loud. Some were quiet. Some impressed people. Others went unnoticed. The room remained completely silent. Sarah always loved being seen. Emily never cared who was watching. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Reynolds continued, when my health began failing, I learned something important. The people who claim to love you and the people who show they love you are not always the same. I looked down at the table. Suddenly, every Sunday lunch, every doctor's appointment, every late-night phone call came rushing back. Emily drove me to appointments. Emily handled paperwork. Emily fixed things around the house. Emily sat with me when I couldn't sleep. My eyes began to sting. I hadn't expected this, not after years of feeling invisible. Across the table, Sarah stared at the letter without saying a word. Sarah visited when convenient. Emily showed up when necessary. The words weren't cruel. That somehow made them more powerful. They were simply true. Mr. Reynolds paused briefly before continuing. For 3 years, I listened carefully. I watched who asked how I was feeling and who asked what would happen to the house. A few relatives exchanged glances. Sarah folded her arms. The brass keys still clutched in her hand like a trophy she refused to surrender. Several people may not know this, but Sarah repeatedly encouraged me to transfer assets early. Now, Sarah's face turned crimson. Dad never said that. She interrupted, her voice sharp. Mr. Reynolds calmly raised a hand. The letter will be read in full. Sarah fell silent, but her jaw remained tight. Sometimes, she suggested selling the property. Sometimes, she asked what inheritance might look like. Sometimes, she talked about future plans involving money she had not earned. The room felt smaller by the second, the air thick with unspoken judgments. Then came the part nobody expected. The beach house was never intended to be a reward. Sarah blinked. What? Mr. Reynolds kept reading, his tone unwavering. It was a responsibility. The attorney reached into another folder and removed several documents. My pulse quickened. The house carries obligations. He listed them one by one: property taxes, long-term maintenance requirements, coastal restoration commitments, environmental compliance agreements. Sarah's confident expression disappeared completely, replaced by something I'd never seen on her face before: uncertainty. What does that mean? She asked, her voice smaller now. Mr. Reynolds slid several papers toward her. It means ownership includes legal responsibility. Sarah grabbed the documents like they might bite her. As she flipped through them, her face grew paler with each page. The beach house required major structural repairs within 2 years, new seawall work, roof replacement, flood protection upgrades. The projected costs exceeded hundreds of thousands of dollars. Several relatives gasped. Sarah looked stunned, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This has to be wrong. It is not, Mr. Reynolds replied, his voice calm but firm. The attorney then opened a second file. This brings us to the next part of your father's instructions. I sat up straighter because suddenly this wasn't about the house anymore. Mr. Reynolds unfolded another letter. I knew there would come a day when my daughters learn the difference between receiving something and earning something. The room remained completely still, which is why 12 years ago I created a separate trust. My heart nearly stopped. A trust? I had never heard anything about a trust. Apparently neither had Sarah. What trust? She demanded, her earlier composure completely shattered. Mr. Reynolds ignored the interruption. The trust was designed to remain confidential until specific conditions were met. He placed another document onto the table. I noticed several relatives leaning forward, their earlier sympathy replaced by hungry curiosity. Everyone wanted answers now, even Sarah. Over the years I added assets gradually and quietly. I wanted the trust protected from pressure, expectations, and entitlement. Sarah's fingers tightened around the house keys until her knuckles went white. For the first time all afternoon, she no longer looked victorious. She looked worried, very worried. Mr. Reynolds folded the letter and looked directly at me. Emily, your father spent over a decade preparing these arrangements. The room seemed frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then the attorney reached into his briefcase and removed one final folder, a thick folder, much thicker than the one containing the house documents. Sarah noticed it, too, and judging by the fear suddenly appearing in her eyes, she had realized exactly what I was beginning to understand. The beach house had never been the real inheritance, and whatever was inside that folder was about to change everything. The conference room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioner and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Nobody looked at Sarah anymore. Everyone was staring at the thick folder in front of Mr. Reynolds, the folder Dad had spent over a decade preparing. The folder that had suddenly become more important than the beach house. Mr. Reynolds opened it carefully. Under the terms of the Carter Family Trust, he said, all protected assets are transferred to Emily Carter. My heart skipped. For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. Sarah certainly hadn't. What assets? She asked sharply. The attorney slid several documents across the table. I looked down. The first page listed an investment portfolio. The second listed ownership interests and several commercial properties. The third detailed dividend-producing business investments. Page after page followed. I stared in disbelief. Dad had been building this trust for 12 years, quietly, patiently, without telling anyone. The total value sat at the bottom of the final summary page. I blinked twice, then a third time. The number still didn't change. The trust was worth significantly more than the beach house, several times more. Gasps spread throughout the room. One aunt actually covered her mouth. Sarah's face turned completely white. No, she said. No, that's impossible. Mr. Reynolds remained calm, his expression unreadable. Your father was very thorough. I continued reading, my hands trembling slightly. The trust included professionally managed investments that had grown steadily for years, rental income from multiple properties, business partnerships, long-term financial assets, everything carefully protected, everything legally secured, everything now belonged to me. Sarah looked back and forth between the documents and the attorney, her earlier smugness replaced by desperation. There has to be some mistake. There is no mistake. Her voice rose, cracking at the edges. The house was supposed to be the main inheritance. Mr. Reynolds shook his head slowly. According to your father's instructions, the trust was always the primary inheritance. Sarah looked like someone had pulled the floor out from underneath her. For years she had believed the beach house was the ultimate prize. Now she was learning it had only been one piece of a much larger plan, and not even the most valuable piece. The attorney then reached for another document. There is one more item. The room froze again. Of course there was. Dad apparently wasn't finished surprising anyone. Mr. Reynolds pressed a button on a small device. A recorded video appeared on the conference room screen. And suddenly there was Dad, recorded only months before his passing. For a moment nobody breathed. Seeing him again felt unreal. Like a ghost had walked into the room. He smiled warmly into the camera. That familiar crinkle around his eyes that I'd missed every single day since he'd been gone. If you're watching this, then Mr. Reynolds has already explained the trust. I felt tears forming immediately. Dad looked older than I remembered. But his eyes were exactly the same, calm, steady, certain. I know some people may be surprised by my decisions. His gaze seemed to reach directly through the screen, especially Sarah. Sarah lowered her eyes, unable to meet the image of her father. Dad continued, "When people talk about inheritance, they usually focus on money." He shook his head slowly. "That's the wrong lesson." The room remained silent, everyone leaning in. I wasn't looking for the smartest child. I wasn't looking for the most successful child. I wasn't looking for the child who impressed other people. His voice softened, becoming almost tender. I was looking for the child who showed up. I felt my throat tighten, tears spilling down my cheeks. Dad smiled slightly. The one who came when nobody was watching. The one who helped without expecting a reward. The one who treated responsibility like a privilege rather than a burden. Across the table, several relatives were wiping away tears. Even my stoic uncle reached for a handkerchief. Dad continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Character reveals itself over time, not during celebrations, not during family photos, not when life is easy. His expression grew serious, almost stern. Character appears when nobody expects anything in return. I could barely keep my composure. For years, I had assumed Dad didn't notice the appointments, the repairs, the paperwork, the countless ordinary moments. Apparently, he had noticed every single one. Then Dad looked directly into the camera, and I swear it felt like he was seeing me. "Emily, if you're seeing this, I want you to know something." The room disappeared around me. It felt like he was speaking only to me. "I was proud of you." Tears rolled down my cheeks freely now. I may not have said it often enough. I should have. His smile returned, warm and familiar. But I never stopped being proud. The room was completely silent. Even Sarah wasn't speaking anymore. Her earlier defiance replaced by something that looked like shame. Dad took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling. "The trust isn't a reward. It's a responsibility. Use it wisely. Build something meaningful. And never let money become more important than people." The video ended. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the room remained frozen, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. Then Mr. Reynolds quietly closed the folder. The meeting was over. Sarah stared at the house keys in her hand, the same keys she had proudly twirled less than an hour earlier. Now they looked heavier, almost symbolic. Because she finally understood what Dad had been trying to teach all along. Inheritance wasn't about what looked valuable. It was about what truly mattered. 6 months later, Sarah sold several personal assets to begin addressing the house's repair obligations. The process humbled her in ways I never expected. For the first time in years, she stopped talking about what she deserved and started talking about responsibility. She called me once, late at night, and apologized, not for the house, not for the money, but for never seeing what was right in front of her. As for me, I followed Dad's advice. I expanded the trust carefully, supported causes he cared about, invested for the future, and built a life based on the same principles he had quietly lived by. I didn't buy flashy things or make grand gestures. I just kept showing up, for the people who mattered, for the responsibilities I'd inherited, for the legacy Dad had left behind. Sometimes I still think about that day in the attorney's office, the smirk, the keys, the final envelope. Everyone believed Dad had chosen favorites. The truth was much simpler. He hadn't rewarded appearances. He had rewarded character. And in the end, Dad didn't leave me the beach house. He left me something far more valuable. He left me proof that the things nobody notices often matter the most.